Good morning, Internet. Welcome aboard, everybody, for the next episode of the What's Your Issue weekly comic book reviews podcast, the People's Comic Book Reviews Podcast. This is episode number 14, and I am actually awake for probably the first podcast in a long time. Typically, when we record, it is at best 9:30 p.m. at night, often later, and by that point, I have usually been up for about 18 to 20 hours, so this is a weird change. We made some schedule adjustments because I had some other internet content production stuff going on yesterday, and then we're trying to jam this in between this and another obligation that I had, but it worked out a little bit because we both had some availability here in the late morning. So with me, as always, is my stalwart co-host, Mr. Stephen Lora. How you doing, Stephen?
Doing good, just a little tired.
Good. Yeah, so we're on
getting there.
Yes, we have opposite biological clocks. So this recording instance is one where I am more awake. It is perhaps one where Stephen is less awake. So hopefully we will balance each other out just in the opposite direction. In case you didn't know, in case you haven't watched the podcast before, this is a spoilery type reviews podcast. We will leave no detail untouched. Should we so choose? We may choose not to cover everything in the comic, but everything is fair game. So if you haven't completed reading your books for some reason on the Tuesday before New Comic Book Day, sweet Christmas, man. Put your thing down and go read them and then come back. And what we do on this here show is in the review segment, we cover 6 comics from DC, Marvel, or Tier 2 or Tier 3 publishers every once in a while in indie. We review them in excruciating detail, and then we wrap that up and call the best book that we read for the preceding Shipping Wednesday. Then talk about our sorry. Motion detected at the front door. My Echo here is tied into my Ring doorbell. So and usually we record at night, so nobody's coming up to my doorbell, so you never hear it. And then we move on to talk about, we call the best thing that we read the preceding Shipping Wednesday, and then move on to talk about any honorable mentions that we have. Those are books that we scored an 8.0 or above on our 10-point by half-point rating scale. And then we wrap it up by telling you what we're pulling the following Shipping Wednesday, which is usually in a day or two from our recording, so that you have an idea of what to expect from us the next podcast. Sorry. So I put the blasted note for this somewhere else than I usually would have. So first up on the agenda tonight, and I'm scrambling this a bit. I realize now, Stephen, the reason I got confused here was because I didn't update the agenda with the final scramble. The first book we're going to cover this week is Star Wars number 59. Story by Kieran Gillen, art by Angel Uzueta, and letters by Clayton Cowles. So overall, I wasn't too particularly crazy about this issue. It was fine. Motion detected at the front door. Alert, your food is here. Alert. I'm just going to have to unplug it. Sorry, I tried turning it down, and then I remembered. The way I have the routine built is every time the doorbell trips, it automatically resets the volume to maximum. So undone by the skill of my own automation, I am. So this comic continues the story of the big three, the triumvirate in the Star Wars universe of Leia, Han, and Luke on the planet Cuban. Excuse me. And in this issue, Luke, in the preceding issue, Luke had finished building his communications transponder, which he had built because they wanted to get off the planet. So if you haven't kept up with this, a few issues ago, they jettisoned escape pods to get away from the Empire, landed on a relatively reclusive planet filled with a kind of tribal society of warriors. They have been learning from them and also earning their keep on the planet. But last issue, we started to see some fragmentation. So Luke had built communications transponder to try and call a ship to the planet, since the planet was only visited by a supply ship once every 6 months or so. Luke, itching to get back to the rebellion and continue the fight with the Empire, decided that it was worth the potential risk to the planet's inhabitants to call the transponder. Leia, we also found out at the last issue, has been working on a whole tactical plan to return to the planet that betrayed them to the Empire, and basically remove them as an economic factor and power center for the Empire. So we pick up with that story here. Luke is going through a lot of conflict resolution with the tribe leader's daughter, a woman who he has shown a certain degree of attraction to. We also get some comical interludes. This is a story, I will say that, one thing I did like about it is it's a story where we get a lot of kind of very, very pointed highlighting of Han Solo, which I feel like is the way to do it. It's not a lot of lingering panels and scenes on Han, because as a character, he only has so much to contribute, and he actually works best when you get him in small doses. We get he and Leia in her bedchamber going over the tactical plan, and then he mentions that he's surprised that that's what she was working on, or was that he's surprised that that's what she called him up there for. And she said, well, what did you think I was working on? And he said, well, I kind of thought, young lady, late night, lady's bedchamber, at which point Leia promptly kicks him out. So we get a couple points of comic relief here. We get another scene where he bumps into someone at the bar and spills the guy's drink and offers to replace it. But apparently, on Human, the way that they handle spilling a man's drink is to have a good old-fashioned gunfight. So, so that happens. Han pulls the oldest trick in the book by getting the guy to look elsewhere, and then promptly shoots him in stun. The other shtick of this comic is that there's kind of nothing that the heroes can do right. It's like everything that they do winds up offending the daughter in particularly. Eventually, we find out that Luke didn't really signal the transponder because the tribal leader was actually jamming it, and so he was just testing Luke to see what he would do. Han kind of failed his test of character by pulling the distraction, because these guys are all about honor. So we end up the book in the story with the Scar Squadron showing up, and I don't know if everybody's familiar with these, but these guys, there were a couple of issues, or at least one in particular, I think back when Charles Soule was maybe doing the book, where
it was Jason Aaron.
Okay, all right, where this squadron of kind of spec op stormtroopers were the centerpiece of the story, and one of the big reveals at the end of that issue was that one of the stormtroopers was a former Jedi acolyte and still had his lightsaber. So apparently, in these were issues I didn't read, the squadron came into contact with Luke. I'm sorry, give me just 1 second. Okay, so I'm on the back side of that cold, and I still have a lot of phlegm and stuff. But apparently the squadron came into contact with the heroes, and they have apparently fought them before. So when they show up on the planet, the heroes are itching for a fight. The tribal leader's daughter winds up taking out Han and Leia, and so the way that the situation is going to be resolved is in a lightsaber duel between Han and the stormtrooper, which is kind of a good potential result, because the stormtrooper never completed his Jedi training, and Luke is on the upwards arc of his. On art in this issue, we still have the matter of the fact that the facial portraits for the characters that actually appeared in the movies appear to be, drawn over. Photos that have been drawn over. However, I still kind of like Uzueta's style, and I like LaRocca's before as well. There's a really great kind of portrait splash page when the Scar Squadron shows up. Admittedly, there's not a ton of other really particularly amazing art on display in the issue. there's a couple issues. There's a couple points where how Han is articulated during the gunfight just looks very unnatural, and certainly doesn't look like the kind of if you ever observed Harrison Ford's body language as Han Solo when he was kind of in gunslinger mode, it looked very much like an old West cowboy. It was very loose, very languid, and it was a methodology that not only gunfighters but lots of people use to kind of fully relax their muscles so that they're not tense before they go into some type of combat. So at the end of the day, I rated this comic a 6.0 out of 10 for me personally. It was fine. It just didn't really move me. And when I was done reading my stack, and I read this was the second to last book that I read. And when I was done reading it, I just kind of felt not empty, not betrayed, and not like something was stolen from me, but I just felt kind of meh. I was kind of like, well, I could have taken that or left it. And the other thing is, other than the Han pieces, the best thing that's gone on in this particular arc in Star Wars has been when we have gotten these small little scenes that really poignantly highlight the most critical aspects of the primary three characters. These scenes that with a one-liner or something, it reveals something very razor pointed about the makeup of their character, whether it is their character as a whole or interestingly about their character at this point. And when you consider it of the context of being in between episode 4 and episode 5, it makes complete sense and enriches the mythology that we've previously known to date. I didn't really feel that we got any of that out of this issue. So, Stephen, you read this. How did you feel about this issue of Star Wars?
I gave it an 8.0. I actually enjoyed it. I just like the way Kieran Gillen writes all the characters. It looks like he's pretty well involved with knowing the characters of the Star Wars universe. He really knows how to write the characters, and I do like that Luke and the woman that he had interest in are having their first drama right now. So it's pretty interesting that because I know they were flirting with each other in the first couple of issues, and now they're actually arguing with each other. So it's a nice change of pace and different dynamic from the previous issues. And I'm glad that the stormtroopers that the one that Jason Aaron created, the whole crew of stormtroopers are going to appear in the next issue this time around, because they didn't get that much development, and I didn't like the issues that they were in, and they have such interesting designs, and I wish they were written better. So hopefully Kieran Gillen does a better writing than what Jason Aaron did. So I'm glad to see them coming around again. So yeah, I actually enjoyed this issue, and I'm hoping to see what the next issue will be about.
Very cool. I will agree with you there. The big climactic swell of the book that did make me very interested was the arrival of the Scar Squadron. I feel like that's just like you said, that's a squadron that that's a meaty plot device that you can really do a lot with. And kind of is one of those things that was created in the comics that you would really like to see pop up in a show or a movie. Let's move on to the second thing in the review section rundown. Can you talk to us about Archie Meets Batman 66, number 6?
Yeah, this is a final issue. It was a crossover with Archie and Batman 66. Is written by Jeff Parker and Michael Walkery. Pencil is Dan Parent. Inker is Jay Bone, and colors is Kelly Fitzpatrick. Not Fat. Sorry about that, Fitzpatrick. And Jack Morrell is the letters. This book is usually about the villains of from Batman 66, like the Joker, Riddler, Catwoman, Penguin, and Siren. they try to mind control the parents of Archie. They end up going to Riverdale, and they end up trying to mind control all the older people, and they didn't get to they didn't get the mind control device to control younger teenagers, which is why the Archie students are helping Batman and Robin and Batgirl. During this issue, Batman is already captured by the villains, and now it's up to Robin and Batgirl and the Archie kids the the kids at Riverdale to save Batman and the rest of their teachers and parents that are mind controlled by the villains. And Archie, Betty, Veronica, and Jughead, and I think Reggie, I forgot his name, but they all team up and decide to dress as superheroes and try to go save Batman and the rest of the people, and they end up saving them, and they end up fighting all the heroes. I mean, not heroes, the villains, and so yeah, they end up saving the day, and they end up saving Batman, and they continue to fight him off, and they was able to break the mind control device, and I guess they call the cops to arrest the villains and send them to Gotham City. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is the final issue of the mini series, and I gave it a 7.5 because it was just an action type of issue, and I thought it was okay for it because there wasn't that. I wish they did the whole bam wham thing, but they just kind of rushed it and they didn't do any of those effects. I wish they did, but they didn't. But I still enjoyed the issue. I did like that all the Archie characters decide to dress as superheroes because they dress as the superheroes that they usually dress as in their franchise, I guess you can say. 'Cause I really don't know I don't really don't know too much about Archie, but I do know that they have their own like superhero identities, like for those special superhero issues that they have. And I don't know their superhero names, but I see the costumes and they pretty much are well known. I can see them I can know it by just looking at it since I've seen it so often. But yeah, it was pretty interesting to see that. And this was a issue series that just you can just read and be entertained by. There's no deep story or anything too complex. This is simple fun, and I actually enjoy that. So yeah, that's why I gave it a 7.5.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I struggle with a little bit with Archie, and it's a weird place too because, just like you said, like there's typically not like an overly deep story that you really have to dig for, and is really a good subject for a highly detailed analysis. The artwork is always kind of in this just below the middle kind of. If I think about comic book art in a spectrum from like simple to super complex, it sits in this weird band, like just below like the 50% mark in terms of complexity and detail. And depending on what you like in comic book art, I tend to applaud more detailed comic book art. And there's different schools of thought on that. So a lot of times we get to an Archie comic, even when I've read them, and I'm like, how do I score this thing and how do I compare it? Like, it just doesn't have, to me, it doesn't have sometimes some of the meat on the bones that I need to feel that I should hold it comparable to, you know, like an Alex Ross or a Jim Lee book or whatever. And sometimes that feels a little unfair. I think the key to me is when the books are written with that nuance that where you can see some very savvy choices being made in the story and the art that go beyond simply kind of laying down the railroad track in the template of what those books have been set before. So yeah, I get you. They're always interesting things to talk about when they come up in our rundown, though. So the next book I want to talk about in the rundown is arguably maybe the most strategically important and relevant comic to release this particular shipping week. And we are talking about the books that ship the 9th of January. And that's Captain Marvel #1. So story by Kelly Thompson, art by Carmen Carnero, colors by Tamara Bonvillain, and letters by the great Clayton Cowles, whose name as a letterer comes up almost every issue that we're going to talk about this episode. So this is a weird thing. I am, 2 or 3 years now into this track, particularly at Marvel. DC has done it as well. I'm starting to get a little uncertain about how I feel about taking an entirely female creative team and putting them on a female lead character book. There was a time that I felt that it was appropriate. There was a time that I felt that was actually an important thing to do. The continuance of it, like 3 years into it, I'm not certain because, and I have been a guy who's railed against this notion of, here we go with the minority book, and it's so contrived. They're making something out of a character. I'm like, well, shut up. That's what comics are. Editorial makes choices and decisions about the product that they're going to sell, and they make deliberate choices. I'm like, what do you mean they're making something out of nothing? That's every comic book is nothing until editorial decides that they want to make it a prominent thing in the publishing lineup. So, but the question to me is, Captain Marvel is highly relevant and is a highly accepted character in both the Marvel universe and now as we prep to see her entrance into the cinematic continuity. There's no doubt that she's gained traction, in my opinion. She's one of my favorite characters. She's been a Horizon character in the Marvel universe for the last 2 to 3 years. It's actually kind of crazy when I thought about it. I mean, she is, as far as I know, I mean, in my age, in the modern era, of like the 1980s forward, I don't know of anybody who has held the reins of the Avengers for as long continuously as she has. So here we are. She has, and I haven't kept up with her since the last single issue continuing that she had, when she has apparently been on sabbatical for the last year. She has been out in space. Her mother died. Her brother was critically injured and was also targeted for murder. And now she has returned to Earth. This was a pretty interesting and relatively wonderful issue. It was something different than I was expecting, and that much is absolutely certain. There's a question as this book goes on, and we have several of these. We have these. I feel like we have these more in DC than in Marvel, where there was an ongoing that is a single character, but the reality is it's really like another Justice League book, right? Because so many members of the Justice League are featured so prominently in the ongoing. That's what we definitely have here in this initial issue. You get Captain Marvel. You get Marvel's version of the Triumvirate. You get Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man all showing up in an action sequence about the middle to the end of the book. You have a conversation with Tony Stark. You have Hazmat, who, if anybody remembers, I don't remember seeing prominently since the whole thing about Murder World, where Arcade captured a bunch of young Avengers and a bunch of New Mutants and trapped them on an island in a Hunger Games type scenario. And then you have James Rhodes, and you have Spider-Woman, Jessica Drew. So you have all these characters sprinkled out. You have a lot of discussion about what Captain Marvel has been doing. I think it's very funny that in one of the early sequences, she has a meeting with Tony Stark, who's like been pinging her via email and tells her to come in for a discussion. And she comes in. They talk about how happy they are to have her rejoining the Avengers. And then Tony says, but there's just one thing. You have to go through an interview. So I thought that was so great and so very, it's a little deconstructionist, right? The notion that, in order to rejoin a company, that she still has to go through the formality of an interview. She can't just be hired, which is a thing that we often see out in industry. And it's always a question of whether or not it's a real interview or it's just academic, or whether or not you're told that it's just a pencil whip, but then you go in there and it's actually like a serious critical review of whether or not you're going to be allowed to rejoin. So I thought that was very, very interesting. There's a lot of great banter between her and Tony Stark, a lot of great banter between her and Hazmat, a lot of it very kind of Whedon-esque in the wittiness of it. In the issue, like I said, she returns. It opens with a big action sequence with her and Jessica Drew. Again, a lot of kind of great dialogue between them, kind of girlfriends, and Spider-Woman being so happy that she's back from being in outer space and going to grab coffee, etc. We also get a lot of the grit and determination that we associate with the character of Captain Marvel and Carol Danvers. There's a reference to her powers having been taken by Rogue, which I felt was always kind of interesting. And then, while out for her interview with, which it turns out is actually with a member of the press, I had this thought when Tony mentioned it that it was going to be with like a panel of the Avengers. But a villain shows up for no other reason, just to challenge Captain Marvel on the merits of her reputation. The Nuclear Man, who James Rhodes later mentions might be a former Fantastic Four villain referred to as Machismo, who I'm not familiar with because I'm not a big Fantastic Four reader. But basically, the two of these throw down in downtown New York, and then escape into a portal. So on art, everything is very well choreographed, and in the end splash page shows Carol now off in another dimension, apparently having gathered together a set of revolutionaries to take on whatever great dictatorship is apparently ruling this dystopian future, or whatever the story is going to be. The thing that I like most in this story is the reconnection between her and James Rhodes. These are two characters who were both taken off the chessboard. Rhodes was taken off during Civil War II, where he was killed, and we had a whole big funeral. Now he's back, which obviously, makes his whole passing of a little less importance, which is unfortunate because his passing was actually a big deal in the Marvel Universe, with the passing of an African-American character and how that was dealt with. The reuniting with the Avengers, and the fact that everybody has great respect for her, but isn't simply willing to have her come back. It's a little weird in continuity too. And again, we tend to not make ginormous deals of those. Well, we tend to either make not ginormous deals of them or very big ginormous deals about it. But obviously, she is featured recently in issues like within the past 2 months, where she was still the leader of Alpha Flight and the Avengers, and I guess whatever constitutes S.H.I.E.L.D. these days. But according to the opening of this book, apparently she's been off the planet for a year. So there's bits and pieces of that story that maybe weren't completely pieced together with sufficient exposition in these pages. I don't want to say the disappointing thing. The thing that's a little unfortunate maybe is, and I'm not familiar with Carmen Carnero's work, and the work is fine. It's definitely professional grade, and it's definitely, indicative of, when you make it to the bigs and doing professionally made comics, but the art didn't do a whole lot for me. And there are issues that we saw this week, recent issues that we've seen of Justice League, the art in Batman number 62, and other recent issues of Batman. It was up against a lot of competition this week for me, and I didn't find the art particularly moving. So it almost didn't break out as a significant issue, but I kind of went back and looked at it a little bit. I wasn't super happy with the creature work in the opening pages. But at the end of the day, I wound up giving this comic an 8.0. So it did kind of cross the threshold of being a significant comic to be considered among some of the above average books that wind up landing on publishing shelves and in Comixology. So, Stephen, I'm pretty sure you read this issue. Did you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, I had thoughts on it. I actually enjoyed it. I gave it an 8.0. It was pretty average to me, and I did like the banter between Tony Stark and Carol Danvers. I know they have a friendship type of relationship for quite a long time. I don't know how long it's been, but I know they've been friends for a very long time. And I know Civil War 2 broke that up, but now they're back to being friends again. And um I do like that Hamizat was in this issue as well. I haven't seen her for a very long time since I think Avengers on the cover. I don't think she has appeared any time after that. And I would like to see I know she was having some PTSD moments, but I wonder if they're gonna dive deep into it even more in this Captain Marvel series. And um yeah, I'm hoping that she's able to recover from it. I noticed I'm not sure if I have to check if he died or not. Her boyfriend I know she had a love interest in Avengers Undercover, and it was like I think it was a character with the red skin skeleton. I forgot his name. It's been a while. But yeah, yeah, and try to gather my thoughts here. So yeah, I'm glad to see Spider Woman's also in the book because she's also another longtime friend of Carol Danvers, and also did like that James Rhodey was gonna end up being in this book too because that was Captain Marvel's love interest, and it looked like they're trying to get back together. I'm not sure they are, but usually when a new writer comes in, they forget the previous love interest. They just like don't even mention it or don't even bring them around. So I'm glad that this writer Kelly Thompson was able to keep the continuity of Captain Marvel flowing. It looked like she's well in the know of the continuity that Captain Marvel has had for the past books. And I did like the mentioning of the previous mini series that they just ended like December. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I'm not onboarding this into my regular recurring pull list just yet. We did agree on the final score. Like I said, we both gave it an 8.0. I guess mine was more of a. I mean, for me, it was a man. This book could have been even better. It sounds like for you, it was a man. This trying to figure out a way to reverse that. Like you were like you enjoyed it, but then maybe struggled to find a thing that would pitch it even higher than an 8.0.
Oh. I gave it an 8.0 because this is action issue. I just like the character conversations.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I felt the most important thing in the whole story was bringing James Rhodes back into it and establishing that link between the two of them, because I think a lot of writers try to deal with Captain Marvel, and again, sometimes it does work well and it is important, but so many writers try to deal with her as a non-romantic character.
Yeah,
and I think that's good. I felt like the Wonder Woman movie struck the right balance in like how do you make a lead female character predominantly a warrior, but still give that 10% of attention to the fact that she has feelings and she is interested in relationships. And maybe hopefully they can find that same balance with Captain Marvel here. The next book I want to talk about in the rundown is Deathstroke number 39, a book that I was not quite as pleased with as I was with Captain Marvel. And I would give you all a rundown of the situation, but man, I don't know if I can. This is almost as eclectic and confusing a book as I have ever read. And part of it is there's flipping time travel stuff in it. And if you want to make a book complicated and make it less accessible to people, put time travel on it.
Yeah.
This is a thing that DC constantly dabbles with. And a lot of times when you do, when you've had it in Crisis and when you had it in like Convergence, Convergence is definitely not a good example. Sometimes when you keep it clean, it works out okay, but then a lot of times it gets like this. And I will say, an even bigger muddle in my mind is what Marvel has done with the X-Men, particularly in the 90s in the comics. But at any rate, there's a ton of time travel here, and it's maybe the worst kind. It's time travel on a scale of like minutes and days. To where, rather than having kind of clearly segmented instances of timelines, you have a lot of things that fall on top of each other. So, so you have Devin in this issue, who's a bit of comic relief in this comic, has come along to kind of, in some ways, mimic Deathstroke in a lot of ways, but he's like, I don't know, he's like 50% Deathstroke, 50% Deadpool. And when he has a costume that looks very similar to Deadpool's, that also gets confusing. But the basic gist of it is Slade was apparently, this is so ridiculous, I even hate running it down. Slade was apparently kidnapped by an alien race, taken to the other side of the galaxy, tried to call the Justice League for help, but nobody answered the call. But part of the reason for that is his call was time displaced. He since he can't get a hold of any superheroes, he calls upon a bunch of villains. They go off to this alien race, kick their butt predominantly, but they get yanked back to the present and back to Earth before they can finish the job. The whole way the time displacement works is they were only gone for a short period of time, and because of the way radio waves travel through space, his call to help to the Justice League actually arrives after he's already come back. The only person who remembers this really well is this kid Devin, who like I said, is a bit of comic relief. We get pictures of the Justice League seeing the call come through, but in amongst all this is Dr. Hugo Strange is dorking with his head. So again, in probably possibly the worst way that comic books are done is you get this unreliable narrator effect where you're like, unsure of, is this part of Slade's psychosis? How much of this is real? Slade is tricked into killing a female psychiatrist who he's been developing a bond with. We quickly cut to Rose out in northern Vietnam going through some ritual in a cave about her sword also having been sent back from the future. She's with Two-Face, but then we have Two-Face back at Arkham with Hugo Strange. The only thing in this that really made perfect and clear sense to me was Deathstroke's son, who has the ability to kind of assume control of other beings. Still confusing to me because I thought he had been killed off at some point, but maybe that's just a misnomer that I have because I haven't stayed on the Deathstroke run the entire time. But comes into the prison to rescue him, in probably the coolest sequence in the comic. He actually takes over Solomon Grundy, which is pretty cool, seeing Solomon Grundy come to rescue Deathstroke. And Solomon, Grundy is just wrecking crap coming through Arkham, so it's pretty cool. Hugo Strange is a very despicable character who I can't stand, and it was nice seeing him get his comeuppance. Deathstroke is about to kill him, but then the kid Devin arrives crashing through the window in a police cruiser right before Deathstroke is about to pull the trigger. Devin's whole objective is he needs to get a hold of Slade because these aliens who they didn't finish the job on are actually now on their way to Earth, and he's trying to get Deathstroke to rally the troops since Deathstroke apparently defeated them one time before. And I apologize, I should have run down the creative team. There's like 19 different artists on this blasted book. You have Priest doing the story. Pencils are by Carlo Pagalileon. and Fernando Pasarin, inks by Jason Paz and Jordi Tarragona and Wade von Graubedger, and then colors by Jeremy Cox. That all being said, the art is pretty fine. I think I was so distracted by trying to keep up with the story that I didn't really nitpick at the art as to whether or not there were different artist styles and depictions throughout the book, as we've sometimes gotten in Deathstroke, where when Batman has been a guest, like his costume, like elements of his costume actually look different from page to page. There's actually a lot of good work here when they are in Arkham Asylum in terms of the amount of detail and the shadowing. Even better when you get to that scene in the cave in northern Vietnam. Unfortunately, it's overshadowed by the complete nonsensicalness of the plot line. This is a book which is barely held together, and I'm not overly impressed by how it's scripted. Hopefully, I believe maybe when there's a big alien battle next issue, maybe it'll tighten up a little, but not the best issue of Deathstroke that I've read since this run started. At the end of the day, I gave the comic a 7.0 out of 10, kind of barely making the grade to average in my book. I don't know. Steven, did you read this issue?
Yeah, I gave it a 7.0 as well. I was very confused with what was going on in this book. Even with having two artists that are slightly similar in their art styles, doesn't really help with what's happening before, what's happening after. And the last issue was much more tightly close, like you knew what was going on, but here it just didn't work. And the whole seeing Two-Face in two places at once, I don't understand why did I see Two-Face in Arkham and why did I see Two-Face with Say Wilson's daughter, and Rose Wilson, that was her name. Yeah. So it confused me because I know in the last issue Two-Face was with Rose Wilson the whole entire time, and now in this issue he's also in Arkham, and that confused the hell out of me. I'm not sure that's an artist error there.
No, I mean it was supposed to be part of the whole thing about it's a Hugo Strange, mind trick or whatever. And I get that, but I'm like, but you could have chosen to depict any character who wasn't really there with Slade Wilson, right? Like it could have been anybody else from Arkham. Deliberately picking it to be Two-Face just doesn't make sense to me. If there was some plot reason to do that, then I would get it, but like I don't, and it just
I know his Two-Face is better written when he's with Rose, but it just I don't know, it just confused my brain.
Right. Yeah,
I was being in Arkham.
Right.
It threw me off.
And I would have been fine. Like the scenes with him, with Rose, the few lines that he had, I thought were cool. I guess unfortunately, I'm not on this as an ongoing, recurringly.
Yeah.
And it would have been nice to understand how that whole story got pieced together. I think that's an interesting plot point, actually, that, I think part of what he mentioned is that he's actually been cured of his psychosis, it would be very interesting to see a mentally functional Two-Face in the DC universe.
I've been wanting to see a mentally function Two-Face for quite a long time, because I noticed his character is very flawed. It never made any sense to me in the history of DC Comics. It's just, I'm glad to finally see a more mentally stable Two-Face. I know he got cured in Detective Comics, with James Robinson. He was the one that was before Peter Tomasi. So I didn't like those issues that well, but I did like how he wrote Two-Face getting cured.
Right.
And I noticed the Deathstroke book took that continuity that just happened recently and put it in his book. Christopher Peace put it in his book. So I'm kind of glad he's taking things that's happening in other books into his. So that's the one thing I do like, is the way Two-Face is written in here.
Okay, cool. Well, why don't you go ahead and take us out first by covering take us out of the review section. First by covering Faith Dreamside number 4. And who is
Yeah.
this book published by?
Valiant.
Okay, all right, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what is it? Yeah, the book is a mini series. It's focusing on the character Faith, and it's also focusing on Animalia, which is another character from the Harbinger, like one of the Harbinger characters that has the power to make some animal cartoons come to life, something like that. And there's also Mirage, which is a person who has the ability to talk to ghosts and see ghosts, and which nobody else can actually do. No one can actually see or talk to ghosts like she can. So yeah, in this issue, they're in the dead side. Oh, I forgot to put say the creative team. The the writer is Jody Hauser. Artist is MK Kim. Colorist is Jody Belair. Um, Dave Sharp is the letterer. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, um, this is also a final issue of the miniseries, and in this issue, they're on this world called the Dead Side. And it's just like it's like a kind of like a dimension where I think dead people go to, and it's like more of a it's a weird dimension. I really don't know the whole full length of it, but I've read it in previous books, and I think it's a dimension full with like a dead space kind of area, and um they've what is it, Faith and Animalia and Mirage and her boyfriend. And there's also a clone of Faith that was in the previous issues that had of the Faith ongoing series that had, I mean, that had ended like last year, I think. Um there's a character that, I mean, there was a clone of Faith that ended up dying. So you see her in the Dead Side world, and you see Mirage's husband, and they're there trying to find who's the villain that's haunting Animalia with her. Like the villain was haunting Animalia with her dead friends, like putting like bringing sending spirits of like her friends that died in Generation Zero, which is another series that ended. And yeah, it was haunting her, and they went to go find out who's haunting her, and that's in Dead Side. So they went to Dead Side. They find out who it was. Is some dragon type of being that was getting stronger and over centuries in that side, and he wanted to find his way back into the alive world, and the only way he could do that was to try to, I guess, have a connection with Animalia, because she had um spirits of friend that had passed away recently, and I guess that was one way to connect. And they went to go fight him off, and they defeated him. They was able to turn him into a little baby dragon. He was no longer a big dragon. And after they defeated him, they also found out that the clone of Faith and Roger's husband was not really in the Dead Side world. That was just a fake version of them, because Mirage's husband was actually in the not in Dead Side. He was in the actual real world. He was still a ghost spirit, but he was in the actual Earth plane instead of that weird dimension. So after they defeat the villain, they end up going back to the normal Earth plane. They're longer in that spirit dimension world, and they eventually get over the stuff that they went through, and I think Faith is ready to be a superhero again and not worry about the public drama that Harbinger Wars had caused, which everybody's a fugitive now, and she's not gonna be worrying about being a fugitive because she was like holding back from being a superhero because she didn't want anybody to go after her because now that she's a fugitive. And but seeing that everyone is basically a fugitive in the Valiant universe, it's, I guess, is okay for her to also be a superhero. I mean, when this is going on, so that's how this issue ended. I gave it a 7.5 because I did enjoy this miniseries. It's just um it wasn't much going on. It was just more about Animalia. And I thought that the spirits was actually the spirits of her friends that passed away in Generation Zero, but we find out that it's not. It kind of disappointed me, and I kind of wish that relationship wasn't just a pretend. I wish it was actually those spirits of them in there. This whole dragon thing just kind of ruined it for me. So yeah, that's why I gave it a 7.5.
Okay, very cool. How about the unexpected number 8?
Oh, okay. Um
No, I mean, is that what?
yeah, that is it.
Okay.
I just I just trying to take a breather.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, the unexpected number 8 is written by Roland Kleikel and Steve Orlando. I think Roland Kleikel is the artist. I don't remember Steve Orlando being an artist. It doesn't say which one is the artist in the book. I don't know why. Jeremy Cox is the colorist. Carlos M. Maguna and Travis Lanham is the letters.
So is this a DC book?
Yes, it is. It's a DC book. It's one of the Dark Knight's Metal spinoffs, but this is the final issue.
Very cool.
So yeah, it was like I guess the lesser known, the ones that I guess this wasn't selling well than the other ones, but I still enjoyed it. This is the final issue of the Unexpected 8, and it's just showing because the characters in this book they're also in a different dimension as well, which is like a dimension that's between uh multiverses they end up being in on. And was it the characters like the Firebrand, Neon, and Hawkman are fighting they're supposed to be fighting Mandrake, who's another DC villain. So yeah, Neon is getting pulled into like some black hole type of thing that's just trying to suck him and Bad Samaritan, which is another villain that was in this series. So they sucking them into like a black hole type of thing, and Neon and Bad Samaritan decide to work together. Even though they hate each other, they decide to work together and try to get themselves out of this black hole and go back to where Firebrand and Hawkman is when they fighting Mandrake. So yeah, they end up going back in there. They end up fighting the villain, and they end up defeating him. And I do like how Neon did defeat him. He ended up using some magic, because the thing is he feeds on positive emotions, I think, and Neon was able to find a way for him to feed on negative emotions, and he turned himself cold, and he just wasn't powered anymore because he's full of negative emotion himself. So he's pulling his own energy. So he was able to they was able to defeat him that way, and so yeah, they was able to defeat him that way and put him away, and that was pretty much it. I think they I gotta try to remember what happens in this book. But yeah, I I gave this issue a 7.5 because it was just a okay conclusion to the book. I noticed they didn't close everything because there was another villain that was supposed to be in the that was in the book, but they didn't even bother focusing on that villain in this issue. And I noticed there was some character development with Bad Samaritan, which is also a good thing. So I know he's a villain, but it looks like here he's that now that Neon helped him save his life from the black hole, he's thinking of turning to the other side and maybe possibly being good. Um so yeah, they um so yeah, it looked like they just defeated the villain and not sure they even got the Nymph Metal isotope they were looking for throughout the whole entire series. But I guess that's not gonna be even mentioned. I just that's one thing I do hate about when series end so quickly. They just don't get to close all those gaps that they were focusing on. So yeah, I enjoyed this series for what it was. I know it wasn't that much of a deep story, but it was still enjoyable.
Right. And I may have missed it. What did you say your score for this was?
Oh, 7.5.
Okay. Right. Okay. So on to the best thing that we read this week. Did you read Die Number 2?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So you were cut in the same wool that I am, which was one of the key elements for us coming together to do this podcast. We were both looking for someone who didn't just read DC or it didn't just read Marvel, but also read tier 2 and tier 3 publishers, as well as the occasional indie. This is a comic by Image. And right now, you are reading a lot more than I do. And that appears to be continuing to grow. All of this is a preamble to me saying I am very reticent to ever say to you, here's the thing that you need to read. I would suggest if you have time, and maybe even if you wait till this comes out in trade, that you give this a look. Because you are a fan of Kieran Gillen. This is a Kieran Gillen book.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, so this is published by Image, story by Kieran Gillen, art by Stephanie Hans, and letters by, once again, Clayton Cowles. The setup for this book, and the first time I heard of this was while listening to the iFanboy podcast. The setup for this book is very much similar to the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon from the 80s. Is apparently in youth, a bunch of preteens or early teenagers were taken and transported to a fantasy realm that was built on the context of a role-playing game that they were playing. When the whole thing ended, they defeated the bad guy, but one of them, as they were teleporting out, one of them was held back and captured by the bad guy. Another one of them, who I think was holding on to him, had lost her arm from the forearm down because it was held back in that dimension because the two of them were holding hands. So these are children that have been scarred. They are all now in their 40s, and many of them are parents. They've been married. They're either divorced or going through a divorce. People are professors. They have lives. And this one member of their party who was held back teleports, is grown up now and teleports them back to this dimension. There was a whole thing of like the whole thing about the Grandmaster, the original villain, was that he wanted them to go into their own dimension and tell people about this world, because apparently the shtick is if you're told about the world and you start thinking of it, then that gives them an access path by which to teleport you there. Of course, Saul, already knew about that dimension. And in addition to teleporting members of this party, he has also been teleporting other people that he knew from their childhood, and frequently they are showing up in the world as NPCs and other characters. The story is just amazing. We don't have time to get into it, but there are things like there was a knight who, during their last journey, the leader of the party, who's a female character, fell in love with him, and he pledged his fealty to her, saying that he would not give up his obligation to her until he laid eyes on her again. When they returned to the dimension, it turns out that he died 3 years after they left, and then his eyes rotted out a year after that, but he was still bound to the earth because of this promise that he made. And so basically his shambling zombie-like corpse actually catches up with her in this dimension, and apparently pissed off and tortured because he can never fulfill his obligation because he's lost his eyes. So there's a pretty amazing set of powers between the rest of them. One of them is triggered. He's called the Grief Knight, and it's triggered by sorrow. The leader of the party, her primary power is to manipulate emotions, and so she actually manipulates his emotions to access his powers, even though he doesn't want to. The art in this by Stephanie Hans is simply amazing. It was the best art that I saw this week, and this is why, in many ways, it was hard when I had to come and compare other artists' work to hers. It's an amazing book. At the end of the day, I rated it a 9.0, which is an extremely high score for me. I definitely think this is much in the way that I think people should read the horror stuff that Cullen Bunn has done, particularly in the last few years on Harrow County. Even if you don't get to it until you get to it in trade. This, at least so far, is shaping up to be a thing that I kind of feel is a must-read. So, Stephen, what was your best thing that you read this week?
The best thing I read this week was it was Miles Morales, Spider-Man #2, which is the writer is Saladin Ahmed. The artist is Javier Garron, colorist is David Corral, and the letters is VC Corey Pettit. So this issue is about Miles Morales going to he's fighting he noticed he runs into Rhino, and he thought Rhino was like robbing some banks or something, like he's already caused havoc, and he finds out that he actually wasn't. He's just looking for he's looking for a bunch of he's looking for his it was his niece, because he finds out that his wife's niece. So, yeah, he finds out that his wife his because the thing is with Rhino, his ex, his wife had passed away, I think, in past issues of Spider-Man. I'm not quite sure, but they mentioned that in here, and he's still very close with her niece. So Miles Morales is, Rhino is trying to look for her because she's been kidnapped, and Rhino decides to ask Miles if he can help him out in finding who kidnapped his niece. So it's also Miles said that he would actually go help him, so they decided to come up with a different day to meet up again and decide to plan this and how they can figure out who has been kidnapping these kids, because Miles has also noticed that a close friend of his that goes to school has also been kidnapped. Is a close friend from the school that her brother, I think, has been kidnapped. So yeah, they're trying to figure out who's been kidnapping these kids, and there's also some Maz is going through his school days, talking with Genki, and he talks with the female student that her brother's been kidnapped, and he ends up Miles and Rhino end up going meet up with each other, and they find out that it's Tombstone that's actually kidnapping the kids, and it's putting some type of mutant, like some type of powers inside of them. I'm not sure if it's mutant powers, but they're being experimented on, and he wants the kids to eventually work for him. Like he's experimenting on children and putting powers in them and making them work for him. And so Spider-Man and Rhino ends up fighting Tombstone, and they'll by the end of the issue, by the end of the issue, they end up running into Captain America, and that's where it cuts off. So I gave this issue a 9.0 because I really did enjoy this issue a lot. I know Saladin, he really knows how to write Miles. I really think that this is even better than what Bendis has written. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this issue. I'm thinking I'll be picking up normally because the first issue was all right, but the second one was really hit his high notes. And I did like how Rhino is written to like he's not like some one-dimensional villain here. He's actually has some type of heart in here, and he's kind of being humanized here, which I do like a lot. And you get to see that he actually cares about his former wife's niece that he still has some type of connection to. And I'm glad that Miles is able to see the good side of him and help work with him and figure out who's been kidnapping these kids. And I'm glad they find out who actually kidnapping these kids. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm wondering how the relationship with Captain America, seeing Rhino and Miles working together, I wonder how he's gonna feel about that, and see how that goes off from there.
Okay, very cool. I've got to have you push on because you're up next in the next segment and walk me down your honorable mentions for this week.
All right, honorable mentions is Adventures of Super Sons number 6. I gave it an 8.0. It's just Robin and Superboy working together, and they run into some new guy that has a bunch of outfits. I forgot his name, but I'll forget about that. What is it? I gave Just League number 15 8.5, which is still continuing the Hulk World issue. It was very fun. I actually enjoyed it. I gave Suicide Squad Black Files number 3 or 8.5 as well. It deals with Katana and the trapped inside a sword in the soul world with her husband, and she gets out fighting the Cobra. And then there's another story with El Diablo and his team of Suicide Squad characters fighting Felix Faust's son. So it was a pretty fun issue. Then there's The Dream number 5. I gave it an 8.5. It just deals with Lucian talking with the girl was messing up the dreaming world, and now they're trying to fix it because Judge Gallows is there and trying to ruin it, and she regrets ruining it in the first place. So I thought that was interesting. So I gave it an 8.5. Spider-Gwen Ghost Spider number 4. I gave it 8.5. It deals with the aftermath of Spider-Geddon. She goes to tell Aunt May, Mary Jane, about Spider-Man Noir dying, and she tells Spider Lady that Spider-Man from the Great Britain Spider-Man had passed away. So yeah, she's just telling that. Is just dealing with grief, which I thought was interesting. The Black Order number 3. I gave it a 8.0. It deals with Black Dwarf, and you get to see what type of character he is, which I actually enjoyed. The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl number 40. I gave it an 8.5. It deals with Squirrel Girl and the Super Squirrel. I mean, not the Super Squirrel. There's some squirrel character they run into that's disguised as Squirrel Girl, and they find out why she was disguised as Squirrel Girl, which I thought was interesting. And she gets to live with some other squirrel that's from Howard the Duck. Um, so yeah, they end up giving her a place to stay. Um, so I gave it 8.5. Hit Girl number 12. I gave it a 9.0, which is the end. It finishes off the story with her going to some Italian mob boss that's it's some mob boss that she ends up defeating. But at the end of the issue, the girl that Hit Girl was working with ends up betraying her, seeing the skull. I'm not sure they could continue in that story, but it seems like the the series is gonna go to season 2's type of storyline, and it's gonna start from as number 1 again with Kevin Smith apparently. So I guess I could look forward to that. I did enjoy it though. I wasn't expecting the plot twist. Um, of the portrayal that goes on. Kick-Ass number 11. I gave it 8.5. I did like the Kick-Ass fighting the mob bosses there, and it seems like her what is it? Her sisters yeah, her sisters finding out who she is, and I guess we see the repercussions of that the next issue, and the next issue is supposed to be the final one. So I'll see how that ends eventually. Domino number 10 was also a final issue. I gave it an 8.0 because it was just Domino fighting off with her friends, fighting off Mojo, and they get to free Long Shot, and that was pretty much it. And I'm looking forward to the next series that they're gonna have. It's just called Hot Shots number 1, and it was just basically all the Domino characters. I mean, all the characters that wasn't Domino. They're making a new team, and it's gonna be a mini series, and I'll see how that goes. That's about it.
Okay, on my side, honorable mentions this week were Justice League number 15, which I gave an 8.5, matching your score. We already talked about Captain Marvel number 1, which I gave an 8.0. I believe you gave an 8.0 also. And my third honorable mention was Batman number 62, which is continuing this whole unraveling the thing between Batman and Bane and Thomas Wayne, apparently. Featuring a full-length story of Batman having been captured by Pig, and then getting all the way, and a lot of unexplainable things happening through the course of the issue, and then getting to the end, and it appears that who was actually in the Pig costume was Damien. So again, we're left a little bit confused about how all this thing ties together. For next week's polls, go ahead and run down your very lengthy list.
All right. It's Detective Comics 996, The Flash number 62, Titans number 33, Spider-Man Deadpool number 44, Superman number 7, Justice Dark number 7, The Batman Who Laughs number 2, Return of Wolverine number 4, Catwoman number 7, Supergirl number 26, Hawkman number 8, Scooby Apocalypse number 33, Invaders number 1, Black Widow number 1, House of Whispers number 5, Shadow Man number 11, which is a final issue. Electric Warriors number 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder in Hell #1. It didn't come out last week. Apparently, it got delayed, so I had to pick it. It got delayed to the next week, which I'm hoping it comes out this week. So yeah, so and also another issue that was also delayed was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles IDW 2020 #1. That issue was also delayed, so they got delayed to this week. So I'm hoping that they'll come out this time around. And there's also Avatar to Seiya's Path #1, which is from Dark Horse, which is a blue skin Avatar. Because I know there's two Avatars. I mean, two series with Avatar, which is from Avatar Last Bender, and then there's Avatar to Seiya's Path, which is two different things, but they both are published by Dark Horse. I know how much confusion that can cause. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, for me, I will also be reading Detective Comics number 996 on the road to Detective Comics 1000, Fantastic Four number 6, Red Hood Outlaw number 30, also reading Titans number 33, Grim Fairy Tales Volume 4 number 11, published by Zenoscope, Albert Einstein Time Mason number 4, published by Action Lab. I will also be reading Batman Who Laughs number 2, Catwoman number 7, Conan the Barbarian number 2. I will concurrently be reading along with you Black Widow number 1, Return of Wolverine number 4, and Justice League number 7. That's going to do it for us this week. Very quickly, Steven, I did want to ask one question, and we've got time for like a one-liner response from each of us. What was very interesting to me this week is neither of us talked about Young Justice number 1.
I did enjoy it. That's okay. Why.
you did not enjoy it?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the same way. I had it targeted a little too far below the belt for me, feeling kind of like an all-ages book with a lack of complexity. The most interesting thing I thought in it is the whole story around Cassie, and I will be looking forward to seeing how that develops.
Yeah, I'm hoping there's some development because the first issue is just characters here and there. It's just like eye candy for their characters.
Well, yeah, and I didn't really like their character choices, like the Teen Green Lantern, the Ginny Hex. Like, I don't see those like adding a lot of meat. Maybe that'll change in the future, but I was just kind of like, I was very interested to see Amethyst in it, who is a 1980s character who is kind of a
She actually had a series in the New 52, but only lasted 8 issues.
Right. So we'll see how that goes. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining in. Unfortunately, I got to get out of here as quickly as humanly possible. Thanks, everybody, for joining in for this week. Join us back here next week on Monday night at around 9:30 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of the E2KG Network and Steve and Laura, that's going to do it for us. Steven, any added things that you want to throw out? Any plugs or anything?
No, not really.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining in. That's going to do it for us. We will see you back here next week. Until then, take care of yourselves and stay safe out there. We're out.